and welcome to Review JU. I am Roth Cornet, joined here by Eric Goldman, who I'm very delighted to see on this beautiful day, and it's delightful to see you as well to talk about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We are going to be talking about episode 4. However, we were not here last week to talk about episode 3, so we might hit on that a little bit too. If you have seen neither, or if you haven't seen one, go and watch it. Come back here. Hopefully you've not seen 4, but not 3, but you get it. Go watch it, come back here and chat through with us. Boy, Eric, spoilers in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Spoilers, 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 spoilers. This is not a spoiler, but boy, the show is getting good. I really like these last 2 episodes.
Interestingly, I did not really dig last week's. I should say there were things.
You didn't like the John Wickiness?
There was things about it I liked, but I thought it was a little rushed, a little sloppy. Some of the things kind of felt like they took some shortcuts to get there. But I totally love this week's. Like this week's really kind of clicked in for me. A lot of the things on the show, what they were doing with the characters. So last week's it was like I had some quibbles, some quibs. But this week I was like all on board. I was totally down. And by the way, the John Wickiness is very funny because literally they got the writer of the John Wick movies to write the last 2 episodes. He wrote
the
3
internet
and 4.
told me. I was watching it. So I hadn't been able to catch up yet until last night, I think at 3 a.m. So I caught up with, or maybe it wasn't that late. I think it was in the evening actually. So I was catching up with episode 3 and I was like, God, this just got really John Wicky. And then immediately Twitter was like, it's because it's the John Wick writer. So thank you, Twitter. I appreciate it. The clarification. And it's just, what's odd to me though, is that, you know, candidly, other than the very cool and I think underrated world building that actually does exist, particularly in that first film of first John Wick, it's a visual aesthetic. So whether they have the writer or not, it's just odd that it visually evoked the fighting style of John Wick, you know, and also just, well, the writing piece that did evoke it was kind of like this idea that like, you're in this area, it's this odd criminal area where there's a code and somebody says, oh, bounty on your head, and then 10 people and everyone knows all of a sudden, and you're in the middle of the street and everyone's hunting you. That is like a very much a writerly nod to John Wick, and that happened in the last film, obviously. Yeah.
And I wonder, it's, you know, chicken and the egg question, because, and I don't know the answer to this, and maybe it's available online, is like, when did they hire him, Derek Kolstad? Because, you know, he's not the showrunner, Malcolm Spellman is. So had they arced out things and they're like, ooh, we want to get a little John Wicky, let's get the John Wick writer? Or was it that he was sitting in the writer's room with them and this is what happened, you know?
Yeah, a fair bit did happen in that episode. Introductions of key important characters, reintroductions of key important characters, I should say. I also, it's interesting because it's like the episode prior, they had really leaned in hard to kind of like the buddy cop banter.
Yeah.
That's not so much there anymore. In fact, he's getting all the laughs, you
Right.
know, like, and he's good, you know, he's really great.
Well, I saw Paul Scheer. It was really funny. I was listening to a podcast, How Did This Get Made with Paul Scheer, and he kind of predicted it. He's like, oh, because they were talking after the second episode. He goes, Zemo's coming. Maybe he'll be the Leo Getz, the Joe Pesci of Lethal Weapon. And that's exactly what he is.
Totally is.
Yes.
He totally is. And he's really funny. But he's also like, I mean, he's such a good actor. You know, he's really funny in one moment, but he's like incredibly menacing throughout, and like you really never know what he's going to do or what he's up to. He is, and at the same time, and that's the thing about this show that keeps getting clearer and clearer to me, is that, you know, well done, Marvel, I think really took the notes of you've got a villain problem in the last several years. I think maybe, and I don't mean this in a bad way, because it's making for really excellent viewing, almost overcorrecting to the point where I'm like, I don't know, they're making a lot of sense. Like, you know.
I mean, look, Loki's the next show, you know, it's like maybe all the villains get their next show first. Yeah, it was funny. I think one of the qualms I had with last week was, like I said, I felt a little rushed to me, and there was some times where I felt like they were undercutting themselves a little bit. So it's like Zemo was so fun, but I was like, is he too fun? Based on what he was in Civil War. And there was kind of a big pivot into like, I'm a baron and I have all these resources we didn't know about. But then this episode made me really happy, because it's like when he straight up just tried to shoot and kill Carly, it's like, oh no, like he is still single-minded in purpose. Like he might be able to like joke around and become a very popular dancing gif. But when it comes down to it, he wants to kill all the super soldiers.
But
And
that's what's working about it. That's what's
yeah,
working about it for me, which is like, Turkish delight. It's irresistible, and it's this funny, weird moment between him and Bucky. But then later, it's actually quite chilling. He's using
and
it to
sad because he mentions his son who
It's because he
died.
mentions, and it's
Yeah.
very human. And so I actually think they're doing an incredible job with this character because he's able to be all of them. They're very fleshed out, they're really incredibly layered. And as we see the turn from the man who imagines himself to be hero, but is so brazenly arrogant and won't listen to anyone and is so stuck in his point of view. Of course, I'm talking about our captain.
Yes. Not our captain, damn it.
He's not not our captain.
Right.
Not our captain.
Yeah.
But I think they're really just doing such a great job of like drawing these characters from the villains, and the heroes are not getting the short shrift. But I will say, I sat there going like, are they? I think Spencer and I are actually going to do an entire video on this, but like,
Mhm.
are they creating so much pathos and so much logic that and a worldview that I happen to agree with, like, which is like,
Mhm.
aren't we all just humans together? What this inequity is unfair, like what
Yeah.
is we have just reverted back to a system that is inherently unfair. All of these things, and I'm like, it's tracking for me. That it's an interesting challenge to then have still. I get, yeah, you shouldn't bomb and kill people. You absolutely, and I'm not saying that dismissively, but I think it's a challenge for me to think, how has, because you get you get the idea that Captain Wyatt has had some history in the war, that he was awarded something, but that was a very messy situation,
No, he has
right?
a great scene in this episode. I thought that was such a good scene with him and Lamar, where they're talking about, I got, 3 medals of honor for the worst day of our lives,
Yeah.
and that this is like, he's got like a sadness and a tragedy to him too, and that he feels like being Captain America is the first thing where he can feel like good about himself.
But he probably
Uh,
did something terrible too.
well,
That's
they
the
they
feeling
do,
I
yeah, they
get.
allude to that. They allude to the
Yeah.
fact that we did terrible things, in the course of like, what was later going to be something we got, got this great award for, and that he doesn't feel great about that. And so I thought that was a really kind of cool thing to put on him, because as we see, it's not like he can stop himself. At the end of the episode, he'll do something else terrible.
Yeah.
So it's like a part of him, but it's not like he's so like single-minded that he like can't ever see when he's away from fighting, he can kind of see the bigger picture, but he still
Briefly.
he loses himself. Yeah.
He loses himself in it. He's the worst person to take that serum.
Right.
But the worst. But well, there's probably worse.
Yes, yes.
There's
But
probably
he's
worse.
not great.
But he's not great. And here's what I was trying to parse out is they're setting up they're setting up our villains, right? Of course, yeah, we don't agree because they're violent and their reaction is violent. Um, at the same time, their worldview and their perspective is something that makes a ton of sense. Even the idea of like, hey, if you're talking about making people better than, that's inherently supremacist. If you were talking about like, I think Zemo's making a great argument. I think that the flag destroyers, the flag breakers are making a solid
Bashers.
argument. Flag bashers are making a really solid argument about sort of the idea of borders in general, that
Mhm.
stands in really clear thematic contrast to the idea of Captain America in total, right?
Yeah.
Of the idea, like, not only does America get its very own superhero with its very own name, it's Captain America, but also it's the symbol of everything else that's been left behind in the face of that, right? And they're making excellent points. And then you have the figure Captain America in Captain Wyatt, who is again very broken, and he's symbolizing all he's inherently showing us through his character all the things that are broken about that. He doesn't listen to other people. He has his own point of view. He is arrogant. He's belligerent,
Mhm.
and he's ill-equipped to really manage power. And then sitting in the middle of that, you've got broken-souled Bucky, who I thought this episode did a beautiful job of highlighting that again,
Yep.
and Sam, who's got his own damn problems and gets it. But how are we able to, at the end of the day, reconcile the idea that we should have Avengers, that they are better than, that they are superior to? You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? They're almost like thematically, by doing such a brilliant job with all these characters, painting them into themselves into a corner that, like, it's true, no one is untouched by this. And if you're going to somehow have a group of people that are so morally superior, are we going to be able to believe that by the end of this? Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I do. It's an interesting. I saw some people debating that about this show because it's raising a lot of really interesting questions.
It's so good.
It's yeah, which I love. Now you have to be realistic and be like, okay, well, can they answer all these questions in 2 episodes? And is it 2 more episodes? And is it their place to, or is it more they're just raising the questions? You know, because some people had an issue with the fact that WandaVision, I guess spoilers for WandaVision 2 here, ended with, yes, her acknowledging that this town was traumatized by her, but some people felt like, but there was still no like real like penance or like, it's like she still walked away from it, and we kind of are left with the town who we're probably not going to return to, kind of left in her wake. But I don't know. To me, I am okay with that, as far as like, I don't think that these shows, like you said, it's tricky because they're still going to be about superheroes. We still want to root for the Avengers.
Yeah, sure.
But these shows are raising these interesting questions about what would their place in the world really be? How would it affect other people? And to me, I do really appreciate that. And I realize that some people go, oh, well, then there should be even more consequences, or we should, should it really be about like a permanent tearing? I mean, Zemo broke up the Avengers, but it was a temporary thing. I think that I'm okay with having it all. I think it's like one thing that the comics have done, which is really interesting, is through the years, because they're never going to end, but they do raise these questions, and they have storylines that challenge people and bring up these issues, and they interweave it with the straight up superhero stuff that we love. And I think that if they can keep doing that, that's great. I think it's always going to be a back and forth though. And I think that that's mileage will vary for people who don't like that. It's like still going to have parts where we're going to cheer them beating up the bad guy. But I think it can balance it all.
What's fascinating to me, I hope it can. But what's fascinating to me is, like, I think my fear was that Marvel was doing such an excellent job, in my opinion, of evolving these worlds, of creating this cinematic universe that we've now talked endlessly about. It's like this thing that no one else had done or has since done, well. Other than, like, I guess back in the day, the Monsterverse, but it's a very different thing. So it's done this incredible thing, and it's reached this epic point, right? Like this apex point with Infinity War. And I was like, okay, now's the point where it turns in on itself, right? And it becomes so self-reflexive that it gets very silly very quickly. But no, they have managed to find a way with these shows to get self-reflexive, but in an actually interesting, engaging, like character-driven, thematically satisfying, dramatically satisfying, and still funny way. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. I'm just legitimately impressed. I remember many years ago, Eric, Joshua Yell and I had a discussion at IGN about The Winter Soldier. And I was like, it's so cool because it's this really excellent way to, like, have us examine what it means to be American with these two different characters that represent what that is, this really broken version, and this really idealized version. But now what they've done so brilliantly with the show is have several different characters examining that at once, which is appropriate because it means many things, right?
Yeah.
And to set it against, but like, what does it mean to be a human being in the world with this global perspective? And then having their vision of themselves fed back to them. Like, I love that moment with Zemo going, like, only an American would say that about your outfit, by the way.
Right.
Because you look amazing first. And that's your worldview that you've been given, right? I just think it's like pretty impressive writing. And that's after coming in the first couple of episodes, liking it quite a bit, but being less sold than I was like on WandaVision. But now I'm just like, this is like really incredible writing, because it also never feels like I'm being, or I don't know how it feels to you. I don't so much feel like I'm being preached to.
No, I same here. And like, if they're biting off more than they can chew, I'd rather they bite off more than they could chew than not try, right? And again,
Yeah,
this
take
is
the
getting
swing.
this is getting ahead of myself because this is saying I know there's the fear of like, yeah, they're raising so many moral quandaries. How, can they wrap it all up in the next 2 episodes? We'll see. But yeah, there's a lot of great stuff here. Zemo mentioning that basically like inherently, if you give someone something that is a super soldier serum, they'll kind of become a supremacist. And I love when they're like, well, what about Steve? And he's like, well, that's the exception. It's like how many people are like Steve Rogers, was basically Zemo's point. So he wasn't dismissing that Steve was a great person, but he was basically saying like how many people could resist kind of going down a bad path if given that. And I really like Carly in this episode because that was another issue I had with the third episode was I was like, oh man, they kind of made this pivot with her when she decided to blow up the building and kill people. We were, she had been so sympathetic and now there's like this turn. I still feel like maybe it would have been better if this was kind of all flipped because this episode then got deeper with her, had her and Sam had some great stuff here together, really talking about this. So I almost felt like maybe they should have had her kill Lamar as her first kill at the end of that. Like, it would have been a little, because it still was a little strange to me that he would kind of, he had to be a little more, not dismissive. He kept bringing up that she killed people, but I just thought what they did in this episode really helped me with her because it really did like contextualize that even more. And what she sees as the noble fight and how, the idea that, being told that, that can flip you into a supremacist. And she's like, I'm not that, I'm a revolutionary, all the things that she feels like she is fighting for and is very just in. And that Sam even says to her that he inherently does agree with her on a lot of what she's fighting for, but not, the means she's going about doing it. And I thought that was great. The things.
Right. 100%. And I think the interesting thing that another moral quandary or question, and I agree with you, Eric, I don't necessarily think it's the job of like, using this term as broadly as we can, art or fiction to answer all the questions.
Here is the solution to life's big problems.
Like, I think it's the job to find a lens to explore it, and it's doing that within the genre that it's in. It's like, it's a comic book genre. I mean, like, I'm not dismissing that at all, but it's pretty impressive. You don't see most of the comic book movies doing that well. And so even for Marvel, I think they're stretching, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
time and
they're being very, I do commend them, for being willing to even raise these questions with very important IP at the end of the day.
Yeah, totally. 100%. I do too. And in an event, circling back to that, I don't necessarily think they're going to be able or have to answer all of these questions, but I think one of the things that they have been doing, I think, over the series of the last several films, as they have had better and better villains, is the answer from the hero's perspective is always seems to be like, you have a point, but you're not doing it the right way. The thing that they're not offering us is, well, then what's the right way?
Right.
It's not just waiting for the next big problem and dealing with that and then ignoring it. You know what I mean? So, and this is as like a human being that does very little to move the needle about anything important in the world at all. So like who am I to judge an Avenger? But yeah, it is an interesting point that I think at some point they're going to have to either address that or they become the status quo keepers. And that's an interesting question too. So again, I'm impressed that we're having this conversation about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, frankly.
Sure. No, completely. Yeah.
And that it's totally justified to have it.
Right. No, yeah, because it really, it's giving us a lot to chew on, and that's really cool. And then the way the episode ended, of course, which was just like, oh my God, way it was funny because when I wasn't rewatching the whole thing, but I was kind of skipping through to kind of take some notes and stuff. And I was like, oh man, it was like what a gut punch. I was like, it's the guy who earlier said Captain America was my hero to Carly that is murdered by Captain America at the end of this episode. Not the same man in the costume, but obviously the whole idea of that image we're seeing right there is how John Walker is not the person to be wearing that costume and holding that shield with the way he is treating it and what he's doing in it, No, and in front of the world, like everyone's watching,
Well, and I thought that was interesting and really smart too, because obviously there's going to be some big political consequences and ramifications to that. But secondarily, it raises this interesting question of like, well, I mean, it still would have mattered if they weren't there and videoing it, correct? Like,
Right, right.
but that's the thing is like,
It would have mattered,
there,
but it wouldn't be the whole idea of what are you projecting out there is a whole
but
other level of it.
yeah, but that's the point is like, I think it's a smart way of illustrating that if the cameras hadn't been there, that he wouldn't have paid, there would have been consequences for him, probably.
Right.
Right.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But they were, and so there
Yes.
will be. And God, he's crazy. Like that was just nuts and so violent, so rough. I mean, I will say, I was thinking like, are little kids watching it?
It is
This is
funny to
getting
think
rough.
about like the whole Disney Plus and what they'll allow and what they'll not allow. I was like, wow, this is going pretty far for Disney Plus. Yes, they didn't show the Shield like tearing him apart, but they showed enough blood splatter and enough hitting the Shield down that we got the picture, you know?
We certainly did.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess we haven't talked about Sharon. Should we talk about Sharon? What's she up to?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, there's the big theory online, so the big theory, of course, is that she is the power broker, and this episode seemed to lean so far into it that I'm like, okay, one of two theories now is that it is her, and they don't want it to even be a big, huge reveal. Like at this point, when she's on the phone and she's walking past all those guys with guns that are letting her
Mhm.
by, and then when she's in that control room and she seems to have a lot of resources. More than just like I got myself stabilized in Madripoor, but seems to be really kind of running the show. It feels like okay, and also there's the fact that they haven't told us who the power broker is at this point, and there's not a lot of time left for it to be any kind of other meaningful reveal. So I am wondering if it's just that thing where I remember Christopher McQuarrie said this about Mission Impossible when the last one, Henry Cavill, the trailers kind of indicated he was the bad guy, and McQuarrie's like, that was fine by me because I didn't even want it to be a huge shock. Like you were kind of supposed to get that. And I almost feel that might be the case here, unless they want to do some weird twist on a
Twist
twist.
on
But
a twist where she's
yeah,
not.
yeah,
Yeah, where actually secretly she's not. And she's working for blah 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 deep
right.
cover. Or it's just that she felt so betrayed and she also had to survive, and this is what she did, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, which is fine by me. I mean, I feel like at this point I'd like her to be the power broker because it's cleaner and because with the show with so much going on, it just seems like the simplest thing, you know? Plus, I don't want to, we're always going to speculate on these shows. WandaVision showed us that, of course, we're going to speculate about things that are going to be totally wrong. And sometimes things that we wish were right. But with her and the power broker, it's like, who else could it be at this point? Because why not just show the dude at this point? Unless you want it to be like, it's this person, you know?
Yeah. And I think it actually ties pretty neatly into what they're doing thematically anyway, if
Mm-hmm.
it's her, you know what I mean? Because it's just a part of this whole idea that, um, even though they were on the run for a couple of years and that was really hard and things like that, they were absolved because they had privilege.
Yeah.
They had the
Yeah.
privilege of being Avengers,
Yep.
and she wasn't because she didn't, and now she's like,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
a very violent manner.
Yeah. And I
Um,
felt like they had the room to do that. Like
we also
that
don't
was
know what the power broker wants in total.
no, we don't. We don't. But I do think it works because it was a weird the third episode was weird because it brought back Zemo and Sharon and gave them both kind of like a new attitudes, which again, on one hand, look, it's supposed to be 7 years later, people change, but it was a lot in one episode. But Sharon, again, Sharon was fairly blank slate. She didn't have that much screen time in those two movies. Plus the idea that, yeah, she would become hardened because she got abandoned kind of by everybody, both her government and even her friends, in some regards. I thought that works, and so if she ends up being the power broker, I think that works too. We don't know, but like you said, what does she want? Because I don't know if that should make her like evil villain who's like, I will destroy you, Falcon and Winter Soldier. That seems too far. But maybe there's a middle ground there on a show that, again, like is trying to portray every person as having good motivations, even if what they're doing is bad.
Yeah, I mean, also it could just be that she's like, no, I do not have good motivations anymore. My motivations are I would like money and power. That's why they call me the power broker.
Right.
It's pretty on the nose, but I'm okay with it. Like, like I
Right.
tried to do the right thing and look what it got me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's less interesting, obviously, but because they've given her a reason, and they've created these really dynamic villains in everyone else. I would be okay with that. But then it's like, well, what does that mean? is she still, anyway, there's lots of questions that raises. But it's also, I think it's as close to having someone that would have been connected with Steve end up being broken.
Right. At a certain point, by the
Truly
way,
broken irrevocably.
yeah. By the way, it was that opening scene was so great. The flashback to Bucky in Wakanda and getting to see this sort of huge important moment of his sort of breakthrough of no longer having those words trigger him. I thought that was in very short screen time, did a lot to portray this very important moment for him, and then also established that him and Ao had this bond from their time in Wakanda. We never had seen them talk to each other, but that's okay. We knew he was there for a long time. And that firmly was like, okay, that she helped him in this very important part of his life.
Yeah, I love that they have that relationship. I love that relationship is being challenged. I love that, we've got different people illustrating the idea of like a means to an end, but no, but mine's okay. Yeah, we got him out of jail, but we're the Avengers. So my version of a means to an end is okay. Yours is not. Yours is not, and everyone's like, no, mine's okay. Yours is not,
Right.
And it just opens up, again, an unanswerable question. There really isn't an answer to that. But it opens up a very interesting series of questions. And also it was great to see them. And it was a great fight scene.
Oh yeah,
and
so
it was fun to see Captain Wyatt get his butt. If you guys see Captain Wyatt, I apologize.
No.
It was nice to see him get his butt kicked too. And
that was great.
And the recognition, because it also, I appreciate that they've given him an arc. It wasn't like he just greedily went for the serum immediately.
Mm-hmm.
He's being driven to, he still shouldn't do it, but he's being, in a sense, driven to it by understanding how outmatched he is, even when they're not super.
Yeah. He's going to be facing some very powerful. The Dora aren't superpowered; they're just so damn good.
Yeah.
What would he do if he had to take on, superpowered foes beyond the super soldiers? So it did. I think that they did, push him enough that he would think that this is the answer to my problems.
Well, we're going to wrap it up here a minute, but Brian, I wanted to check with you and see if there were any questions or comments that you want to pull out.
Yeah, I can go through some. I think you guys touched on at the end two of the biggest ones that I had ready for you, which was the Bucky opening scene and the stuff with Wakanda and Ao, and then the stuff of Sharon, power broker or not. Langley said, so Sharon is the power broker, and then DJ Demons replied, Sharon equals power broker is a red herring, which is what you guys also talked about. And then Pat G said, I don't think Sharon is the power broker. If she is, she led Zemo, Bucky, and Sam to her golden goose and got them killed. It would feel like really bad writing. So they're a little all over the place of how we feel like it's working.
Yeah, that is true. Like, why would she lead him to the scientist that can make more of the serum, and then Zemo killed the guy? Even if Zemo hadn't killed him, they might have taken him away. That might have turned, if she was the power broker, that would be bad for her. We think, again, we don't know exactly if she is the power broker, what the end game would be, or what the power broker's end game is if it's not her.
Well, and I mean, listen, that wasn't the very last dose of super serum that we're ever going to see in the MCU. And so if
other people have tried to make it. Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of theorizing in the chat of how many there might be left.
Right.
Even the show. Yeah.
My guess is if that was her, what was the guy on Breaking Bad? The first cooker.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
The guy that got shot in the face.
Yeah. What was the guy's name?
Huh?
Gail Bedecker, the guy.
Gail.
Yeah. Okay. So if that was Gail, you know that she has a Walter in the wings.
Well, also, yeah, it's like, and they've already established that so many people have tried to redo it. Zola made the version that Bucky has, and then the Abomination, Tim Roth, who is coming back next year in She-Hulk, he had a version of the Super Soldier Serum, and the fact that they're bringing him back right now feels like, ooh, again, they like to look at all the ways they can connect things.
We could be wrong, but my assumption is if she is the power broker, they have an explanation for that. Like, she had more than we think, or she has another person to make it, and that one was expendable for whatever ultimate goal she's after with having played along with them. Like, she clearly would want something out of it ultimately.
Right.
What that is, maybe it's just to get to her enemy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there might be multiple reasons that she feels that would be the right move to make right now.
Well, we will be talking about it in 2 more episodes. That does seem like pretty quick to wrap it up, but we will see how they do in the next couple of weeks. We will be back here talking about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We definitely want to talk about it with you as well. We thank you for joining us today, and see you next time. Eric, anything from you?
Oh, the only thing I was going to say, I will say one last thing is I did see one of the comments you put, Ryan, was Suze Vera saying, Disneyland, build a Madripoor rave, please. Obviously, in response to Zemo's very popular dancing. And I just want to say, I back you on that. And they had a club called Videopolis in the 80s and 90s. You can look up online, bring back Videopolis, but make it the Zemo's rave club. And I think it sells itself. There you go. Right.
Do you like my dancing?
Yes. Them putting out that hour-long loop of him dancing, by the way, yesterday was genius. Give the people what they want.
Unleash the cut. I also like the little slight shade. I'll admit, I do think it's funny.
Yes.
It's fun shade. It's good humored shade.
Yes.
All right. This is it. You guys have to make it stop.